The setup for Deepsend is so interesting. There is a town called Deepsend that exists on the edge of essentially a huge bowl. And at the bottom of that bowl is a dark forest full of magic and evil and a lot of mysteries and unknown. But in the town of Deepsend, there exists an order of people whose sole purpose is to protect the towns outside from the evil that lives inside the forest. There's a lot of lore, there's a lot of prophecy, and there's a lot of gravity that the members of this order give themselves when they take upon the responsibility of protecting everyone from the horrors of Poldesper. For years, attacks would sporadically come up from below, and any attempt to even profit off of stealing or smuggling things out of the forest usually ended in mass amounts of death because of just how dangerous all of this was. And this seemed to be the cycle of things going on for many generations until one day, a naked man is found walking up the steps out of this forest. The guardian of the town sees him coming up, rescues him, gets him through the door, has to fight off goblins to do so, and this is where the story begins in Kai Greenwood's Deepsend. This is the first book that I'll be reviewing for SPFBO 8, which is Mark Lawrence's self-published fantasy competition that takes place every year. I've been asked to be a judge, and I will say that the setup for this book was super compelling. Unfortunately, my overall thoughts for this book boil down to a single word, which is disjointed. And the reason that this is frustrating is because the parts that work for me work super well, but then there's other elements that just pull me out of the story or make me less interested in the story or sometimes confuse me. Starting off with one of the most minor of criticisms, this is a self-published fantasy book that seems like it could have used some more proofreading or editing. I'm not the type of person who normally catches grammatical or spelling errors. It's not my typical way of processing the information, but unfortunately, the very first use of profanity in this book had a word spelled wrong, which made me wonder if maybe the book was taking creative license with the way that profanity or expletives would be used in this world, but then when other profanity was used later on, including the same word, it was spelled correctly. But because it was a word that was used to punctuate a scene in this way, it made it really obvious to me when it was spelled wrong, which made me then subconsciously be looking for more errors in spelling or whatever later on, and I, they were there. I'm not the type of person who that would really bother me all that much if I really love the story, but it was something that was distracting, and it was sort of something that started the pile of distracting things about the series. Going back to the profanity for a little bit, there are a lot of elements that combine together to create the tone for a book. Deepsend has a fairly straightforward prose style, but so many elements in the story have a weight or a seriousness attached to them. So many of the deep historical lore and prophecy elements and like dark, powerful magic elements that exist within this story give a certain vibe to what's going on. And the ways that modern English profanity was used in this world was always extremely jarring. And I get why that can be difficult, because if you use a bunch of made-up swear words for the characters to use, then of course, when they use those words, they may not have the impact, or it may seem like a cop-out or something. But in this story, it felt more like when they were speaking English swear words after saying a bunch of proper nouns, and like they have different gods in that world, and they have all of these other elements. It felt weird when the characters would rarely enough swear that it was always something that pulled me out of it and be like, that just doesn't feel quite right, especially because that built upon the disjointed nature of the fact that there was this serious dark omen thing happening over here, while the narrative mostly closely follows this small cast of main characters while they have a couple flashbacks and they also are interacting with each other in the town. All of the parts that had to do with the mystery and the magic, and as the story progresses towards the latter half, it was really, really cool. It was atmospheric. I would be at the edge of my seat wondering what in the world is going to happen, because the way that a scene was painted, or the mystery of something, or just the idea of the ways that magic might be being used in the world, super, super great. Anything that's able to spark the imagination in the way that parts of Deepsend do, I have to give it major kudos. In the latter half of this book, we actually spend time seeing a lot of these cool things become part of the story, and that was really the best part. Even though I'd been struggling with various things up to that point, the way that everything was coming together in these sections where the magic actually started taking more of a front and center stage, it had the chance to win me completely over, even though I had other frustrations. Unfortunately, I really didn't think the ending landed on more than one level, and it might have actually been made more frustrating by the fact that I really had gotten invested at one point in the story. I wanted it to be more, and I saw that it could be more, and I was more disappointed than maybe I'd been if it was just more even keeled. When it comes to the characters and the story, and even a lot of the story beats, in Deep's End. I like the idea of what happened, and I saw what Greenwood was trying to do much more than the execution of those ideas. I keep coming back to the word disjointed. I think when characters had a character growth or things that would change based on events that they saw, it didn't feel supernatural. It felt like they were going one way and then something would happen to them and they'd go a different way. And it never felt like they were truly real characters. It felt like they were just progressing along the points of a story instead of feeling natural. And unfortunately, I felt that happen with pretty much every single main character in the story. There were definitely attempts made to show and not tell a lot of this character growth, but just the way that it was handled and the specific elements of what was shown oftentimes had the characters respond to those events in ways that didn't feel natural, even in the setting of this fantasy world with the things that we'd seen so far. Characters would just never respond the way I would expect them to respond based on the character we knew them to be at the time, and that didn't change really. This book is relatively short, but there are so many side stories that are introduced that feel like they were not given enough time for the amount of weight I think they're supposed to carry in the story, that it made me want to root for the characters more than I actually did, including one character's backstory, which is introduced so late into the story and in a part of the story that was already so much more interesting than the backstory that we were being given, that it was just kind of confusing to me that it was included at all. But even up to the ending, I wanted to know what was going to happen. I wanted to see if all of the dominoes that had been set up, even though I'd struggled with things up to that point, would land in a way that was still satisfying, because that can really work for me. And the ending just didn't work for me. It was like a tonal thing. It was the way the characters came together. It was the ending of certain storyline arcs. They just felt empty. Critically, I know that it was supposed to be a big deal when certain things happened, but the way that they actually happened on the page, it wasn't like it made me angry, but it didn't make me excited. It sort of made me just be like, oh, I guess that's how it happened. And that's the sucky part of it. There were parts that were so cool that I loved so much that the fact that it didn't work for me was super lame. That being said, there's still really cool things to be had here. If you enjoy the mystery of like folklore, like epic, and when I say epic, I don't mean like the way that it's used in the modern sense, like old school epic, like this feels half like it's supposed to be like a normal fantasy story that revolves around characters and character growth and character interactions and relationships. But the other half of it feels almost like an epic tale from like old stories, where it's supposed to be an allegory for the journey that someone takes through life. And the way that the magic system and the way that the lore of the world comes together, it feels more like it's supposed to be that, even though in the moment-to-moment parts of the book, we're mostly following these characters. It felt like it was trying to split the difference between the two. And I loved the epic lore prophecy side of that. It was still super cool. The locations, the magic, even the execution of that stuff worked super well. And since the book isn't super long, if you're really looking for something like that you can get a little taste of, I'd still recommend the book. But as a sort of cohesive total package, I'm not sure that it lands in that way. I hope this review is useful. If you thought the parts that I loved about this book sounded interesting, you should still check it out. Have you read Deep's End by Kai Greenwood? Have you heard of this book before? Please let me know in the comments down below. If you like this review, give it a thumbs up. It helps out the algorithm and stuff. And if you'd like to see more reviews from me in the future about whatever I'm reading, including the other books for SPFBO 8, please consider subscribing to the channel. If you hit the bell, you'll get notified every time I post a new video. I hope to see you again soon. Until next time, goodbye.
Sleep, no one ever get enough. Always looking out tired. Sleep, no one ever get enough. If it don't show up, I might get fired. Sleep, no one ever get enough. Always looking out tired. Sleep, no one ever get enough. If I don't show up, I might get fired.